So, I'm Harriet, for those of you who don't know me. In my day job, I'm Chief Officer of the Volunteer Centre. In this context, I'm also Chair of the Compact Partnership. And thanks for all the welcome. And actually, thank you for coming out on this really quite horrible night, because it is fairly disgusting outside, so we're really pleased to kind of see us all there. My task primarily is going to be to take you through some of what the Compact work in progress with the strategy is and where we've got to, and tell you a little bit about it. We'll then have some kind of critical discussion from the audience and the panel members as we go through. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing in detail in a one-er. We'll do it in stops and starts. However, before we started that, there are just two very small anecdotes. As I was walking up from the volunteer centre to here and striding along and thinking, okay, so this is a strategic framework about how the third sector works better with the voluntary sector and the third sector, how we all collaboratively work together for better outcomes for people and how we work together for better outcomes for the city. And I was reflecting on a couple of things that had happened today to me that were particularly pertinent to that. So indulge me for just 5 minutes. The first of those was that before I left for work this morning, I got a phone call from my mum who lives up in the Highlands, who had fallen and banged herself and cut herself open. She has Parkinson's disease. She has a care package who come in. It was all fine. It was all straightforward. The really nice thing that happened about that was that, first of all, I panicked. Then I phoned Lochaber Home Care, who were the care at home service, who phoned me back very shortly to say, it's fine, we've been in, we've got the district nurse to come in. Then Lochaber Home Care phoned me back later on and said, and we want to do a review of your services for your mother because Crossroads, we think, might add an additional support to your mum's care package at home. Now, this is relevant, I suppose, to this because what we are talking about is the partnership of all of us working together. So it was, Highland is slightly ahead of that in doing health and social care integration before Edinburgh, but it's about that all of us working around a person to make sure somebody is safe and secure. When I came into work, we had a staff meeting. We have a staff meeting on the first Tuesday of every month. We had some very difficult, challenging conversations about the money and the resources and how we were going to struggle to keep the same staffing complement that we have done previously. And we had some strategic discussions about what we are all involved in as partners across the Volunteer Centre, one of which was me telling people about this and about Compact 10 and about how we were working together. Not surprisingly, some members of my staff, of the staff at the Volunteer Centre, were, what does this mean to me? And so I'm not going to apologise for kind of putting people on the line. It brought to mind a really nice case study from our North Edinburgh Time Bank, who's perhaps one of the members of staff who is most grassroots based, but we're saying, how does Compact relate to me? And she had talked in a case study, and I will read you this case study, if you will indulge me, just for a second, because it seems to me pertinent, but it's not directly about partnership, but it is. I do have the permission of the people involved to talk about this just before I actually kind of say anything. So, Karen is a single mum of 3 children under 10. She's been with the Time Bank for a year. She's got a social worker to help her deal with some aspects of parenting. Last year, she was the victim of a serious assault which knocked her confidence. During that time, she kept coming along to the Time Bank singing group. And her children said she was much happier when she was going along to the singing group, and she felt useful and part of something. A couple of months ago, she had a serious allergic reaction which almost made her lose her sight. She had a social worker working with her. Social worker wanted to access community home help to help Karen and the children stay in their home. But to qualify for that care, she had to go to her GP. The GP was uncomfortable with children staying at home given her disability and recommended that they be taken into foster care. During all this, she contacted the Time Bank, and as soon as the people knew what they wanted, they helped out. So somebody collected the children from school and fed them, somebody helped Karen go to the supermarket for her shopping, another person from the Time Bank took her to several appointments at the Eye Pavilion, and all of those people were people who'd got to know Karen through the singing group that was part of the Time Bank. Now, all of us as third sector partners could tell any number of those parallel stories about the prevention role that the third sector plays and also the partnership role of all of us and the different services interacting, and how we do that better, I think, is key to what Compact is about. So, background context politically, and at the gathering, the Nicola Sturgeon just very recently talked about how we need to change our thinking and see the third sector as a full delivery partner, as opposed to just grant-receiving organisations, so that we can actually change the whole culture of how we deliver services better together. And this council, as Cooperative Council, Edinburgh Council, has also, this should, in this context, probably actually say Andrew Burns as chair of the Community Planning Partnership, because I think it's what's really important to be mindful of here, that this Compact Partnership is around the whole Community Planning Partnership. This is all of the public sector and the third sector. This is not just council, but it's useful just to note that we are all trying to work cooperatively together. Just a little reminder of where the Compact sits in the framework of the Edinburgh Partnership community planning structure. Many of you will be familiar with this, but the strategic part, we are Compact in red, is one of the strategic partnerships that makes up this family of partnerships that works around the Edinburgh Partnership Board. I have to say, this is probably still a draft in the exact design of what this looks like, just being conscious of where it looks like. But this is roughly what the Community Planning Partnership family looks like. Neighbourhood partnerships are key in this and critical as we kind of look at this together. Before we started this new Compact strategy, 2014 is 10 years since the first Compact strategy was started. So over 2014, Milland, Denise, Sarah, you will have seen in all sorts of environments, Graham, everybody else, out talking to people, saying, what do we want from this partnership? What do we want of this relationship? And what have we achieved in the first 10 years, which, as Ewan rightly pointed out, have changed the relationship between the public sector and the voluntary sector quite considerably, but still, it's a work in progress. So we have, things have moved on a long way. I'm not going to, you have in your packs, by the way, one of the documents you have in your packs is just a fairly brief note, I think, I'm looking at Denise, of the last 10 years of what the Compact Partnership has achieved to date. I want us to focus on what we're going to do for the next 5 years looking ahead, so I won't go back over that, but you can look back on those achievements. Where we have got to from all of this consultation is this diagram, and I think it's important to say this is still a work in progress. This meeting tonight is part of that consultation, but this is where the Compact partners with all of you have got in a fairly broad thing. So in our vision, we are about active, resilient communities where a vibrant third sector works in partnership with others to build social value and reduce inequalities. Important in the Community Planning Partnership to be mindful of reducing inequalities, reducing deprivation and inequalities is at the heart of the whole community planning bit, and it's been such a major driver for much of the third sector that it is critical to kind of hold on into there. The yellow triangle are how we should do all the work that we do in partnership. So it should all be about sustainability. We all need to be co-producing the outcomes we're working together. And as with all of the rest of the community planning family, we need to have an eye to prevention in everything that we do. I'll go through the strands of future thinking, resourcing and investment and infrastructure and reach, and the thriving third sector just very shortly. But coming into all of those, and this is equally important, are underpinning strategies that have been developed during the period of the last Compact Partnership, but carry on and through and into this. And one of those is the volunteering strategy, and one of those is the social enterprise strategy. But it's about those kind of behaviours that are likely to run through pretty much everything that the third sector does. And all of it about contributing, obviously, to the community planning outcomes. So this is the top bit, this is the vision, which you've seen. I won't open it to discussion now, but all of these things are open to question and discussion, so let's keep it open on that. On the first strand, one of the things that Compact traditionally has been good at in its first 10 years is actually continually looking ahead. Those people who have been party to Compact discussions will remember that there's been a lot of quite visionary thinking at a kind of national level. So total place initiatives that some people might know were probably first, which are about all of the partners working together, and there's one in Total Craig Royston, and there was one in Edinburgh East that about the public and voluntary partners working together. First of all, were discussed at the Compact Partnership. So it's led on quite a lot of future thinking, and the voluntary sector itself is hugely an innovator and leads on a lot of the thinking on that. The outcomes that we want to achieve are keeping our eye on the biggest worldwide initiatives that can be developed. I don't need to read the slides, you can read the slides, but how we champion third sector-led innovation, how we champion new technologies, and how we actually understand the demographic and social trends that we are going to have to respond to. In your packs, you will have all of this, I think. What we have, in developing the strategy, started to put together some actions that are ways that we might actually help this to happen. We don't yet have the full set, and they will evolve as we go along. So I think it's worth just reflecting on what some of them might be. So the sorts of actions that will help us do the future thinking are running conferences, discussions, updates on practice, bringing into the city worldwide initiatives such as the Integral Cities model. If you want an expert tutorial on that, ask Milland, because he tends to be more expert on the future thinking, but just different ways of doing business. And the second sort of set of actions about that are leading innovation on sustainable change to public policy and services in the city. So how do we lead innovation around the Community Empowerment Bill? How do we tackle health and social care integration so that it works well and properly for us and for partners together? Importantly, the move to localities. Those of you who have looked at, actually not just council, health and community planning collectively are starting to cut the city up into different quartiles. So we're going to need to have a different approach to how we deliver business there. And on the new technologies bit, some of that is showcasing pilot activity and work from other partnerships. The Drug and Alcohol Partnership, for example, I gather, I don't know this for certain, but I understand is developing an app that is actually about different ways of supporting people with addictions. It's that kind of future thinking that would be good if we as Compact could bring out from things that are happening in a very small basis and share more broadly around the city. The block down the side, thriving third sector runs through everything. In order to be able to work in this partnership together, we need a thriving third sector. We don't often or always know what we mean by that. And we're not always, as a third sector of social enterprises, volunteers, micro-organisations, huge national organisations, community organisations, we are very, very diverse. We don't always have a common understanding of what the breadth of that is. So understanding and utilising that is one of the outcomes we want this strategy to achieve. Active citizenship in all its forms is essential. I'm passionate about that from a volunteering side, but it is broader and deeper than volunteering, so it is all sorts of community engagement, community involvement, participation. Social enterprise resilience, and that is both developing social enterprises as micro-organisations and social entrepreneurs, and ensuring that the third sector itself needs to be more enterprising. All of us as, those of us who manage and run voluntary organisations cannot avoid thinking about how we need to be more enterprising in the environment where there just isn't that money around. Ewan made reference to the fact as a grant giver that he had so many fewer grants to give around than the money was there, and we just know that's the case. So enterprise is essential. It's not a necessary, it's not a nice to have additional luxury. It's something we have to do. The strategy would hope to support leadership and entrepreneurship in that. And the final one in this one on the outcomes is we would hope that the third sector becomes a sustainable long-term career option and actually leads on fair and innovative employment practice. Sometimes the third sector is seen as a poor relation in terms of its employment practice. I don't know if any of you saw the Third Force News article just today about what people think about working in the sector. Broadly, people love it, but they still complain about pay, they still complain about terms and conditions, they still don't know whether they've got a job next year. But actually, we could do better with that, and we could develop more of that in this track. So some of the actions against this section are gathering the data and understanding the sector and sharing of it. Some of you will have responded already to the Compact Voice survey that went out, and it will be a commitment of the strategy going ahead to do that on a regular basis to actually gather the intelligence and understand the sector. Some of the sorts of things that might be useful to develop as actions around the leadership and entrepreneurship are placements and secondment opportunities across the different partners. And in the career option bit, some of the work that we need to do as a partnership is working with our public partners to ensure that contracts are developed that actually allow us to support the living wage in the sector. And I know the council has made some commitment to pilot some work in that direction, but it would be really good if in partnership we could actually do that, because if we are champions of reducing poverty and inequality, we actually need to make sure there are structures in place that don't suck us into selling services at the cheapest price. Okay. Jeff, may I ask you to comment? I have the difficult bit now. I have to say our commentators have been allowed to see this in advance, so they're not commenting entirely cold.
I think I say thank you, Harriet. That's the polite thing to do. Formally of the Scottish Government. It's a wonderful designation. We have 3 formalies down here. I used to be somebody, that means, and now I'm not. And this is a curious night for me because I used to wear the shield of protection which said government, Swinney, those kind of people. And I could say what I liked because I was protected. And now my public life and my private life are blurred into the one. So you'll have to forgive me if the things I say sound as if I was still in my old formerly life, but actually I'm in my new real life. And having escaped from being in the ivory tower, it's quite invigorating to be able to say just what I think. Those of you who know me, and many of you do know me quite well, that's no change there. You know, I'll still say what I think. Let me say the first thing then. I'm a fan of the compact. I'm a fan of this idea of these sectors working together. Now that's my get out for what I'm going to say after that. I want to talk about position, power, and pounds. Those are the three things that are in my head about the compact. I'm not sure whether the NHS Acts coming into force on the 5th of July 1948 had anything to do with my conception 3 months later. But I appeared in July 1949, and at that stage, I think my parents must have been quite relieved. In many ways, the arrival of the NHS completed the public sector framework of Britain. Before that arrived, my parents, on my voyage into the world, would have looked to the private sector or the voluntary sector for help. There was no public sector. There were doctors' panels, but basically there were only the two sectors. And before that war, the public sector was a very narrow kind of thing. Really, it was only the local authorities, and they were a different kind of animal then. These two are the ancient components of village life. People from whom we buy things, and their profit drives them to do better. These days we call that the private sector. In the old days we called it shops. People, the other one is people who provide under a different driver. They have a reason for doing what they do, and it's something about indefinable. It's concern for their fellow citizen, it's concern for doing stuff without reward. It's complicated to define, and to save defining it, we've got a blanket name, which is a bit silly, because we call it the third sector. And Harriet, I know, because I've watched her language for nearly 10 years now, she calls it the voluntary sector. And then we have people from the social enterprise world here tonight, and they say, well, we're in the third sector. And then there are other bits of it. But that bag of things that we are all here about, except the ones who are in the public sector, that's the third sector. And the public sector is the Johnny-come-lately. They're the nouveau riche. They've just arrived. They've only been going since, really, the war. That's only 65, 70 years. And in some places, it has yet to arrive. And for some things, there is no public sector. In 2010, and some of you may remember this, one of my Scottish Government colleagues went to the Social Enterprise World Forum in California. And when she came back, I was teasing her about your great week in California, you're all tanned and all of that, but actually she was ashen. She was shocked to find that in California, there are only two sectors. There's the private sector, fat cats who make money, and there's the third sector, the voluntary sector. And there's nowhere else. If you're in trouble in California, you either get money or you rely on charity. There's no the safety net. So we're in a charmed world here in having that third sector, which is the public sector, sitting between the two traditional sectors. In California, the drivers are profit or pity. That's all there is. Something happened in Britain. Many have forgotten those two primary sectors. They now expect the public sector to do everything. And I've been experiencing that recently. I was at a meeting last week about working on improving a park. And the people who came there to say they wanted stuff done wanted the park swept. But the park was just round the corner from their house. They regard it as their back garden. Why couldn't they get a brush out and go and sweep it, rather than expect some poor soul in the Parks Department to go down in a van and sweep it? There is that failure so far of the deep citizen engagement in things where we assume airily that the councillors will send someone down, and all the councillors are well used to phoning the right person to get a little bit of mess tidied up. And as I'm now a community councillor, because I have a real life outside government now, I get the same kind of thing. Fix something that's just something you could have fixed yourself. The compact, for me now, is a pushback operation to restore the right balance, to get the third sector into its proper central position. So, to power. Successive governments have failed to realise why the third sector should be the primary choice. The SNP government, we had Nicola Sturgeon up there. I was thinking, I'm sure I wrote that for a previous person in her seat, but never mind. The SNP is the only one I have seen which has a vision of services being provided to the people, for the people, and by the people. That difference has come in previous governments I've worked for 30 ministers and quite a lot of different governments. They all thought the third sector were the noisy people who wanted a grant, and the way out of all of that was to give them a grant and shut them up. So you give money to the noisy people first, and people who are doing something useful, well, they can go hang. The SNP government, for all its faults, and I have no political views whatsoever, I've spent 40 years not having any politics, they seem to me to have caught that quite well. They just see it as sensible administration. But even the third sector is a confusing place. I chair the board of Street Work, looking out for 3,900 people a year who are on or heading for the streets. We have no volunteers, except the unpaid board members. So the 6 of us sit around the board being the volunteers, and everybody else, they're paid social workers. And they're not paid buttons. We don't have many people. I've got my chief executive here tonight, he'll correct me. We don't have many people on the minimum wage, because you can't get the clever stuff these social workers do on the minimum wage. What makes us desirable? We bid for and we get contracts from the public sector and could do so in commercial competition. So why us? Well, only we have decided to do something that we want to do, and we have persuaded people to fund us. We need money to do that, to pay for our professional staff. We are regulated and we get good ratings. Given that we're heavily dependent on our contracts, are we not really public sector? You know, in what way are we voluntary sector? Another part of my life was in community-based housing associations. In those days, they were little gangs of really feisty, difficult women, always women, who got together in their street in some awful housing scheme in Glasgow and said, if the corporation isn't going to fix our crap houses, then we will. And then they banged on about getting money, and lo and behold, there were little small voluntary community housing associations set up by fired-up activists, and we have fired-up activists now. Instead of saying something must be done, they got up and did it. But today, housing associations are on the evolutionary path. They're heading for the public sector big time. At some point, they will look just like public sector organisations. And that's a problem, because the feisty, difficult activists aren't in that kind of business anymore. Meanwhile, the public sector is changing in the opposite direction. We now have elected health boards. That's heading towards the third sector. We've got less central direction. We've got more local control. All great things. Local things are sort of like third sector. Some public bodies are becoming charities. Edinburgh Leisure, a charity. Hard to see when it's got all those councillors on the board, but it's a charity. We've got British Waterways, as they don't have in England. Now we have British Waterways, a charity in Scotland. And then we've got Historic Scotland. Now, of course, the key here is that these are kind of offline things. These don't really matter if they disappeared, but they are becoming charities. We don't mind being rescued by charities. We have Mountain Rescue, it's a charity. The Lifeboat, it's a charity. Everywhere else in the world, it would be the Coast Guard going out, public sector stuff. So where is the place where the third sector should be and the public sector should be? It's for you to decide. That's what the compact's about. Finally, pounds. Where are the drivers? Certainly the financial benefits of being a charity are very enticing. All those reliefs, all those exemptions, all those good things. I'm not sure the public sector has our clarity of vision of delivery to people, for the people, by the people, but it is on the way. So where are we today? The village of Edinburgh, because it is just a village. Look at us now. I know probably half of you here from all my previous lives. I have no private life now, so you're not in my private life. But actually, some of you are, been to Christmas parties. The village of Edinburgh has a finite amount of money to spend on itself. Some is with the council, some is with the private sector, and some still comes from outside. A lot, actually. You know, even that wretched UK government sends money up here occasionally. Overall, the kitty is not big enough to do everything. Community planning is about how to spend the village funds properly. It is just that little group getting together and say, where should we spend the money? It's not about the power struggle between the sectors. It's not about the power struggle between the public sector organisations themselves. It is that there's some money, there isn't very much, and we're going to spend it carefully. There are statutory services to provide, but it's no longer the case that the public sector has first call. It used to. When I was running government properly and doing things the right way, the public sector is where you went and got things done properly. Those awful people in the voluntary sector, you've no idea the things they would get up to with our money. It was just quite shocking, really. It's changed today. Right, coming to the last page. First conclusion. We, the third sector, I can say that. I chair a charity. I've been on the board of another charity. I help charities. I'm a community councillor. Somewhere in there, I'm in the third sector. So I'm going to use the word we. We bleat too much that no one loves us. And everyone goes, ah. And if you're the Cuddly Animal kind of organisation or the National Trust, then people say, ah, have some money. If you're street work and you say street work, people say, just take them away, will you? It's very difficult to raise money for the people that street work deals with because you don't get that glow. You can't put your hand on a homeless person. We don't feed them soup. That's not the job of, that's not how you fix people's lives if you're a client of street work. Much more needs to be done with them. We don't get business. We don't get these contracts because we're lovely, kind people. We get it because we do stuff better than most. We don't need special treatment. We don't need special exemptions. We like the charitable bit, the financial bit, but eventually somebody will twig that that is just a hangover from a past. People want to work in the third sector for many reasons, and it's seldom about making loads of dosh. Sometimes it's quality, sometimes it's flexibility, sometimes it's passion. And when you ask somebody in the third sector, why do you do this? It's a blur of those things. You're never quite clear what a third sector person is really after. If you're in banking or all those kind of worlds, what are you here for? Well, I'm not here for the good of the community. I'm here for loads of dosh. That's the difference. And then you get into the world of historic Scotland, public sector. What am I here for? Well, I just like playing with old buildings. My partner who used to work in historic Scotland, so I've told him that tonight. Second conclusion, there are only three. Most third sector bodies, this is one for you, Claire, are not going to get much from social enterprise. It's not an add-on to provide unrestricted funds. It's a business in itself. It's a great business. It's a great way of doing things. But it isn't something you can glue onto the side of a charity or a voluntary organisation that you currently run. And I've tried that in two places. Street Work used to run a cafe. What the hell do we know about making lattes? What do our homeless people who've just scraped off the street know about pouring out an espresso elegantly into a little cup? That wasn't going to happen. And we made a fantastic loss on it. It was wonderful. Shed loads of money going out the door, charitably raised money to run a social enterprise. It works, but it works under bright, interested, single-minded management. So don't add it on. Do it. And Claire will tell you how to do it. It's not a miracle cure, but it's a real kind of way of doing the social input that we're looking for. And I heard Ewan muttering earlier on about social impact bonds. Social enterprise is real. Social impact bonds are rubbish. Third conclusion, and my last one. Businesses thrive with strong and capable leadership. There's no good business around the country which hasn't got that. And you'll have seen the collapse of supermarket businesses recently where they've been throwing chief executives out the door at a rate of knots, I think 3 since Christmas. Strong, capable leadership in business. Businesses thrive on a committed and capable workforce. You can't make stuff if your people won't come to work and like coming. And I seem to remember a very large company assembled a huge number of people to run the Olympics. And on the first day, they didn't bother coming. So we had to put the army into running the Olympics. That's what happens when you don't have a strong, committed workforce. The curious thing about the third sector is that most organisations I know, the people come to work come what may. Although my new chief exec tells me that absence rates are higher than he would expect. Not sure what that's about. It may be that sometimes walking around the streets at night is just a wee bit much the next morning. Businesses thrive on insight and innovation, and so does the third sector. It is very hard to see the differences in the way you would run a third sector organisation from the way you would run a good business. And it's unkind, because all those people who are saying, well, we're not like business. You are. We don't do things that way. You do. The regulator makes you. We don't do that with money. Yes, you do. The Companies Act say you have. And if you're going to be a SKIO, you have to do that too. So finding the difference between the private sector and the third sector is really quite difficult. Both thrive in the same way. Apply the test to the public sector, that's more difficult. And remind you, I started by saying, I like the strategy, I like the compact. I still do. I shall support it to the end. Thank you.
So whether we could have a better coordinated approach, working through the compact strategy, working through a CSR board to better link in business activity. So that might be something we could explore through compact. I think there are references to that coming forward in the action plan. On co-location, absolutely. We've got 450 properties in the city. You map on top of that the third sector, you map on top of that NHS. We have an awful lot of property. Now, this isn't a silver bullet, but certainly the BOLD programme in the council, which is looking at how we're going to save money yet still maintain outcomes for communities and citizen service users, is looking at that. And I think there is an opportunity. We often quote the Norton Park example, Old Council building, Community Development Trust set up. Most people in that building seem to say that it works well for them in terms of a shared service. Could we look at that across the city? Some work going on in Leith with youth club providers and tram depot and all this kind of stuff. So that there is something in the co-location that could meet probably a lot of our savings targets, yet still improve access for citizens and service users. On the role of GPs, as we move to this model where we try and embed 4 localities in the city, and we lay on top of that health and social care integration, all the other public service reform, I certainly detect through colleagues who are part of GP contract management, either at Scottish Government or locally, a real growing interest in GPs to engage more in exactly the sort of activity you're talking about. So the social prescribing stuff, freeing up GPs to attend neighbourhood partnership and working groups. We have a great example in Craig Miller, I think, where the local GP at the health centre chairs a local health and wellbeing group in the neighbourhood partnership. Now, these are minor examples, but it feels a different place to where we were maybe a year, 2 years ago. So I get a sense that's coming. So that's just coming back on those 3 points.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many of these are directly responsible or relating to police, but to pick up on a couple of the points raised, first of all, the losing of identity has been part of a partnership. I very much see the third sector as the critical friends in all of this. Sometimes we as police and other public sectors can be somewhat bound by rules and regulations, and it's really good if we're looking at innovation and Scottish Government-led projects that's coming from the third sector. We also heard about the Leith example with this relatively small group. The discussions that we had with Denise and Sarah from a police perspective was very much about what is the best solution in that locality-based area. So if we're looking at the wicked issues in Leith and your organisation's the best place to deal with that, then that's far better than using maybe one of the more recognised citywide organisations that we have in the past. And then finally, I was just going to talk about co-location, which is at the heart of everything that government's looking to do. We really need to start letting go of the ball in a lot of respects to who is the best placed to deal with any particular issue. And we certainly within the police are well versed in the benefits of co-location. We've had it in Wester Hailes. We're looking at Craig Miller as well. It absolutely is better when you're placed with your partners on a day-to-day basis to help deliver some of these services. That's all I was saying.
Can everyone hear me? I was just struck when, Jeff, you opened talking about the NHS, and I guess it's, for me, there's a fundamental reason why people work in the NHS, and it's probably back to the core values of the NHS. And I think being explicit about people's values base when we're trying to work together to create new partnerships or create new spaces where people can have different conversations that aren't about competition but are much more about collaboration is being quite overt about what the value space is. And I think picking up on the comments about social enterprise. For me, social enterprises isn't just about earning money or making money. It's about all the other things that social enterprises bring and the opportunities that social enterprises bring for people that might be quite marginalised from a more traditional workforce or workplace. Heather's comment about GP access, for example, we are, again, looking at different models, particularly around mental health, where we would have open access to mental health services. Now, people look either overwhelmed or underwhelmed when we say that, but we don't know if we'll be overwhelmed by people, or we don't know if we'll be underwhelmed. But I think we need to try it and see if that would give a different response to people and a different set of responses thereafter to the initial presentation. I think in terms of communication, which Jan Bart raised, I think the question for me always when I read plans and when I write plans is, what does it mean for me as a citizen? And one day I might be a citizen that's feeling quite well and quite robust and quite resilient. Another day I might be a citizen that's feeling a bit vulnerable because bad things have happened that day or whatever. So I guess it's about keeping in your own head that you're coming to this both as a practitioner, a professional, either a policeman, a fireman, a member of community council, whatever, but you're also coming as a citizen, and what's your dual role sometimes to consider.
Okay, I think for me, the delivery partner bit, and do you lose that critical voice, is actually really, it's one of those things that we work on all the time. And for me, there's a bit there about the maturity of the partnership means that you don't lose that critical voice. And that's what I would want us to, that's where I think Compact has tried to lead us for the last 10 years by the nose, and that's where I'd hope it would keep taking us, that it's about the maturity of the partnership. That means that you don't then just kind of complicit in the lowest common denominator. You're actually pushing each other to do things better. And that's my ambition for the next 5-10 years of Compact, that pushes us to do things better. I was really struck about Jeff's point, though, about that the fact that the Compact for him is also about pushing the third sector back into the centre of that debate. So we're no longer at the periphery of it. One of my things is, I keep saying, I don't want to talk about 2%, I want to talk about 100% of what everything is about. It's about citizenship. It's about being there and being part of the whole. But we need to break it into bite-sized bits, because I'm very clear about with Jan Bart as well that we can't swallow the whole elephant. So you've either got a decision about, you know, you swallow the whole elephant or you break it into wee bite-sized bites. And I think that's what we need to do. And it's about the culture that we're actually saying. So if there's an issue in Leith, then there's an open door to say, how do we solve that? If there's an issue in the high street, there's an open door to say, how do we solve that? And we rub out the boundaries. So you also mentioned those boundaries. How do we stop those boundaries from being, you know, the inhibitors for things? And I think that's when we get the innovation. That's when we get the pushing each other to do things better.
Thanks. As a vegetarian, I always struggle with eating animal meat.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that's absolutely right, in terms of how big is it and what can we do?
Yeah.
Thanks very much. We're going to move to the second section, and again, Harriet's going to introduce that, and that's the section on resource